today's episode, we have a very special guest with us, Dr. Rachna Agrawal from Aerospace Engineering Department at IIT Kanpur in India. Welcome to the episode, Rachna.
Thank you for having me.
So, could you just please explain our listeners what do you do in the field of planetary exploration, design, and the architecture of missions?
It all starts with asking the right questions of what do we want to explore, what are we looking for, what are scientifically interesting problems, and based on once we decide the objectives of the mission, then the design part begins, where we look into the engineering side of the missions. So to make the science possible, we have to look at our engineering constraints, optimize the trajectory of going to a particular planet or destination, optimize the overall spacecraft design. So the mission design contains a lot of multidisciplinary work. So we bring together all the subsystems that go into a mission, starting from the launch to the end of the mission. So we have to plan everything from the very beginning. And since there's very limited resources out there, we have to optimize the mission as much as possible.
Nice. So, how does a mission planning works if we talk about sending a mission to a particular planet? So,
Mhm.
what kind of steps are involved in that particular
So
mission?
first, whenever we go to some other location, we have to first decide where on that planet we want to go to and what exactly we want to look at. That sort of defines some of the constraints in the mission. So, for example, going to Mars versus going to an asteroid are two very different things. So, depending on what the destination is, that sort of gives a limit on how much, what launch vehicle you need to use, how much payload you can send. Payload being the scientific instruments that are being sent to study the destination. And based on those constraints, then we can define what other support is required to make those payloads functional. So it involves the supporting structure, controlling the temperature and environment of the payload so it can work, sending the data back, so designing the communication architecture of how we are actually going to send all the data that's collected back to Earth. So it involves a lot of operational planning, a lot of subsystem, what we call sizing. So how much mass do you need to send? So mass is a premium in space missions. So your launch vehicle has limited payload capacity. So you always have to design from that perspective of what is feasible for you to launch from Earth.
So, if I understand it correctly, there are many steps which are involved in planning a mission. But out of those, location, which means like which planetary body we are targeting, and then how much mass we can send to that planetary body in terms of payloads. These two are one of the most crucial things, or there are any other components which are the like most crucial components of designing a mission.
So those two are the basic sort of constraint setters. But beyond that, then it depends on the complexity of the mission. For example, a mission, if it has to run for decades, then you design it for a certain robustness with a lot more margin in mind of what all could go wrong. For example, a mission like JWST, which is designed to be operational for many years, versus, let's say, a Mars orbiter, which is designed to be operational for maybe 1 year, and then if it can extend its life, but so the baseline design that also sets the complexity. And what do you want to do there? So do you want to land on the surface? Do you want to send a rover, or just a lander, or just an orbiter? So these sort of things increase the complexity, and as you increase the complexity, then that involves a lot more new technology development depending on what is the objective.
So it's a very, very complex task to design a mission from scratch, like from conceiving the idea that we want to send a mission, then we have a science case for it. what kind of scientific activities we want to do about it, and then you plan the mission, what like how we can actually send a mission to another body and then do the scientific exploration. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So what kind of early decisions influence the what kind of task our mission can do? So what kind of early mission decisions are involved in such kind of explorations?
So that's a good question. So a lot of the constraints are set by trajectory itself. Also, the schedule of the mission, how much time do you have until you need to launch? Also, the destination itself sort of limits how much what you can do there. So, for example, if you're going to Jupiter, you need a lot of radiation protection in the design, versus if you are going to Mars, you don't need it that much. So those are sort of different constraints set by the destination itself. Other decisions is it's always better for, you can always optimize your design much better if you already have your payloads decided. But a lot of the times these decisions work in an iterative manner. So for example, a scientist might come up with 10 different science questions and 10 different instruments, but the engineers would come up with a design constraint that we cannot take all the 10 instruments with us, or we cannot do it for such a long time, or we cannot get into that particular orbit that you want. So it's sort of a back and forth between scientists and engineers, where they iterate the design to maximize the science output, but also to keep the cost in mind, because otherwise the cost can get out of control very soon.
Nice. So it means like there are multiple components which decide what the mission would look like. It's not just the science case, it's not just the budget. All the different components will give a shape to our mission or what we want to do.
Yes.
So you mentioned multiple components. So out of these, I agree, like all of the components are very important and crucial. But if you have to choose, like which part of a mission designing and then launch is the most crucial among these ones? So do you have some particular task in these ones to pick?
So my favorite task is trajectory design, because transferring from Earth to some other destination, that requires a lot of fuel, propellant. So that propellant takes up a lot of the mass of the spacecraft. So that's one of the key parameters. So that's my favorite part. It's also because I have been trained mostly in trajectory design. So it's one of my favorite things. Then the other part depends on what you want to do there. So for example, if you want to go into the atmosphere of some other planet, then you need a lot of heat shield, because you'll be going through a lot of drag in the atmosphere, and very quickly your velocity or your speed is going to break in a very short period of time. So that leads to a lot of heat generation. So that's a challenging part. So it depends on what the mission is exactly, but I would say for me, trajectory design is exciting part.
Nice. So you have worked on Mars as well during your PhD, and then you have also worked on the Venus mission. So which one you enjoyed more, or you're still working on some other planets?
Yeah, that's like picking your favorite child. So I like all the planets, and I enjoy and I have enjoyed the mission design of doing this mission engineering for all these different destinations and missions. So my work has been very different for Mars and Venus. For Mars, it was for human missions, so it was a very futuristic sort of project. But for Venus, we were looking at more near-term things that we can do, more short-term to mid-term, within the next decade, what we can do for exploring Venus. So these were two very different projects for me. Other than that, I've also enjoyed working on missions to an interstellar object. So we recently, in 2017, we discovered this for the first time, Oumuamua, which was the first interstellar object ever detected. So we designed a mission to intercept it and study the object. Some people speculated that it's an alien technology, but yeah. So the mission was very interesting to design something to an interstellar object. Then I also find the icy moons, which are Enceladus, Europa, moons of Jupiter and Saturn, which have this subsurface ocean of water. And it's said that it's considered a very high priority target or very interesting target for searching for life. So designing missions for these targets have also been of interest to me.
Yeah, you mentioned searching for life. So this is something which I guess it's one of very futuristic objective for humanity to look for life at other planets or look for alternative planet after Earth, the way we are destroying our planet. But if we come back to the science part, so if we look at the habitability part, what other planets can have or sustain life or can nurture life as we know at our own planet Earth. So your work on Venus was in this direction. So you were looking for presence of some signatures which can tell us like there might be life on Venus. So could you please explain a little more about your work on Venus?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just take one step back and talk a bit more about, give more context of Venus. So Venus is our closest neighbor, so Venus and Mars, but Venus is very similar to Earth in its size and mass, and it also has an atmosphere, a very substantial atmosphere. And it's scientists believe that in the past it was very much like Earth. It also had oceans, and it was the climate wise it was very similar to Earth, but over time it sort of diverged and turned into its present condition. So presently, the surface of Venus is not habitable. The surface has temperatures of up to 450 degrees Celsius, at which point all the carbon bonds break. And it also has very thick atmosphere. So the pressure at the surface is 90 bars. So you would get crushed if you're on the surface. So surface is not habitable, but our motivation comes from the upper atmosphere. If you move up as the atmosphere becomes thinner, and about 50 kilometers altitude, the temperature and pressures are very similar to how we have on the Earth's surface. So this is like when you climb a mountain, how the air becomes thinner, it becomes difficult to breathe, and temperature, it becomes colder also. Similarly, on Venus, the temperature and pressure decrease as you go up. So in the cloud, in these 50-kilometer region, Venus has a very thick cloud layer. So it's almost spanning 20 kilometers thick cloud layer, and it covers the whole planet perpetually. So it's always there. So this is the region where we think that it could be habitable. And if it's habitable, then there's potential for microbial life to exist in such an environment. So that is what I was looking at in my previous work.
Oh, that's very fascinating. So when we say we are looking for life signatures on Venus, it's not the surface, which is very hot and all acidic and not habitable at all, but we are looking for signatures of life in the atmosphere of Venus.
That's correct.
So that brings me to another topic, which is exoplanets. So we also look for life in other planets as well, like apart from our solar system. So is that also something similar in those exoplanets also, that there might be some life signatures in the atmosphere instead of having these life signatures on the surface of these planets? So can we distinguish in case of the exoplanets, like if it's coming from the atmosphere of it or it's coming from the surface?
So for exoplanets, it's a bit it's not possible right now to distinguish where the signature would come from. The technique there is to study the atmosphere, because right now we don't have advanced enough techniques to actually look at the surface or image the surface. But what we can look is the composition of atmosphere. So in that sense, the similarity between studying Venus and exoplanet would be that we are studying the atmosphere, but the source of the biosignature, so to say, it can be anywhere in the on the exoplanet, but we won't be able to tell where.
And in case of Venus, what kind of biosignatures were found in the atmosphere?
So currently, there is no definitive biosignature, but there have been candidates in the past. So more recently, around in 2020, there was a study that came out on the detection of phosphine in the clouds of Venus, which led to this acceleration of this missions to Venus. So in that case, phosphine was said to be found in quantities which would not be possible unless there is something actively replenishing that phosphine. So that is why one of the candidates was that it could be a biosignature, because life on Earth, phosphine is considered a biosignature because life produces phosphine. So that was one of the biosignatures. And in the past missions in Venus, which were sent in the 1970s and 80s, they found certain levels of gases such as oxygen and sulfur dioxide and water vapors, and some other gases, which were also, the abundance of those gases was not explainable by our present knowledge. So that is why these were considered. That is why we are considering them as an indication that maybe something interesting is going on. And it could be life, not necessarily, but life could be one of the reasons. And that's what we are trying to study.
So, how is this mission designed to study the atmosphere of Venus? If we could know a little more details about how this mission will actually study the atmosphere of Venus.
Right. So this is very interesting because typically for planetary missions, we either talk about orbiters or landers and rovers. But on Venus, since we want to study the clouds, we want to spend as much time as possible in the clouds. So there are a couple of ways, two ways mainly. One is if you send a atmospheric probe inside the clouds and you attach a parachute to it, so that parachute can prolong your time spent in those altitudes. So in that mission scenario, we can get up to 1 hour in the clouds, and we can put some instruments on the probe which can study that. Now the challenge is, since we have very short time, we have to take instruments that that don't need a long time to work. So for example, if we can't take a microscope which needs to collect some sample and prepare the sample and look at it and for a long time, right? So we have to then, in that scenario, pick instruments which can do quick analysis. Another more enticing idea is to send a balloon. So Soviets had done this in the 80s, where they sent Vega it's called the Vega mission. So they sent 2 balloons to Venus, and it carried some temperature, pressure, wind sensors, and also carried one instrument called nephelometer, which basically studies the cloud particle geometry or size and shape. So so balloon mission gives us a lot more scope of what instruments we can take. And this balloon would then go around it will stay in the afloat in the clouds for maybe a week or a month, depending on the design of the balloon. And within that category, we can then have different types of balloons. There could be just a simple balloon which naturally floats with the atmosphere. There could be more altitude controlled balloon, where the balloon can actively go into the lower atmosphere and then upper atmosphere and do these cycles for better measurements. So there are different categories. One interesting thing about Venus is that it has a super rotating atmosphere. So what that means is the atmosphere has very high velocities. It actually completes a rotation around the planet in 5 days. So at 50-kilometer altitude, you have wind speeds of up to like 60 meters per second. So in that case, the balloon naturally just goes around the planet in a week. So that's an interesting part of Venus.
Oh, that's very fascinating. So, yeah, I guess now we are also getting the answers to what I was asking in the starting. So, for a mission, if we are planning a mission to a planet like Venus, and if we are planning a mission to a planet Mars, there is like huge difference. So we have to take a different approach for both the planets. So I guess this is what mission design and architecture would involve, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Nice. So if we now have to take a similar setup to Mars, like similar setup, I mean, like if we want to do similar research activities on Mars, then the approach would be completely different. So when you were working on Mars, what was the approach for Mars? Because for Venus, you had constraints for the surface. We cannot land, and there couldn't be any rover. So for Mars, the setup was totally different, I would assume.
So for my particular research, I was looking at human missions to Mars, and my research problem was to design an architecture such that it can be sustained over decades. So it was a very sort of a long period campaign, and I didn't particularly tackle a science question, but so I would say in case of Mars, the main constraint in that case comes from your site selection. So on Venus, you don't have to pick a site. You're just going to go into the atmosphere and float with the clouds. You have to select some things like what altitude range and what latitude and all, but it's not that specific. But on Mars, you land at some position, at some location, then you're pretty much constrained by how much, because you cannot go to cover the whole planet by one location. Your rover will maybe go 10 kilometers or 20 kilometers, but not much outside that radius. So that's one of the main constraints. So for that, what we looked at was, so some scientists, they periodically come together and discuss about which are the landing sites of interest. So there was some workshop more than a decade ago or so, which listed about 50 landing sites of interest for human missions. And these were selected based on, so one of the questions is search for life. So for there, you'll pick a site based on what is the likelihood of water existing at that site. And what is the exposure to, what is the temperature variations that site faces, because Mars also has seasons like Earth. So how does the temperature vary? Also, when it comes to engineering, you are very constrained on which site you can land on, because we don't have runways, right? We don't have like helicopter pads there to land. So we need to go to locations which are naturally flat. So we cannot go to a very rugged terrain. So we cannot land directly on a mountain, let's say. So those constraints are very different for Mars compared to Venus.
I guess now, at least me and all our listeners can also appreciate much more how much hard work goes into planning the mission. And it's not like when we see a launch, we all get excited, okay, there's a launch, and then something is landing on some other planetary body. But there is so much that goes into planning and executing that mission. Okay, coming back to the Mars question. So on a lighter note, I wanted to ask you about if you have watched that movie Martian.
Yes.
So is it something like something that can actually happen in reality? Like, can we have a little colony on Mars, and which we can sustain for a longer time and live there?
Yeah, it was fun watching Martian and then pointing out the technical gaps there. But so that is one of the goals, I think aspirations of many spacefaring nations to actually have humans landed on Mars and in the long term have a colony. But it will require a lot of technology development and a lot of investment from everyone. So it is going to take like the whole planet a global effort to actually set up a colony on Mars. In the movie, I think the note where they started on, where a storm sort of topples the lander,
Yes.
that was one of the sort of difficult parts, because Mars has a very thin atmosphere.
Okay.
So it would require a very, very strong storm to actually topple a lander. But yeah, so that was interesting part. But yeah, so yeah, having a colony on Mars, it's not technologically impossible. It just requires a lot of development.
Okay, now we know what they chose in the movie. So, like apart from Mars and Venus, you mentioned the icy moons also in the outer solar system. So, is there any mission, or are there any missions which are being planned for the outer solar system as well for the search of life?
Yes, so NASA is sending this Europa Clipper mission. It's already on its way to Europa, which is Jupiter's moon. So this mission is going to specifically do a lot of flybys of Europa and try to study its surface. So that's one of the missions that's looking for life. They are planning an Enceladus lander also, but it's not yet like a sanctioned mission. But there are plans for those as well.
No, I see. So we have a lot to look forward in future.
Yes.
So this is a very interesting, like all the topics that you have mentioned and the steps that you have mentioned, how a mission is designed, how you execute it, what are different challenges and constraints are involved. So I just wanted to ask you how your interest developed in this field and how you chose this particular path. So if you could share a little bit with our audience.
Sure. So I was actually inspired by the Indian space program. So I think around when I was in middle grade, the first Chandrayaan had launched. So just sparked my imagination of what all can be done. So that is what pushed me into the aerospace engineering field. And so my journey from there has been just naturally, I have been following this path of towards doing something for planetary exploration and engineering, and I like engineering. So I've been trying to combine these two, planetary science and engineering portions, as I progressed in my like studies, and then pursued PhD in this field. And so I chose PhD also because at that time, India had just started the Mars and program also, but there was not a lot of activities going on. So I chose Purdue University, where they were actually looking at sending humans to Mars and doing outer planetary exploration, and a lot of exciting things were happening, and nothing seemed out of bounds, or nothing seemed too crazy there. So that opened up a lot of opportunities for me, and also my imagination of what is possible. And then I have just pursued this goal after that.
That's amazing. So you were also part of ISRO's Pratham satellite project. So did it also help you to choose the path that you are following in some sense?
Yeah, so in undergrad at IIT Bombay, they had a student satellite program called Pratham, and at that point, I think it was already halfway through, and I had joined at the sort of the tail end of the project. And for I worked with the team for 2-3 years, and we were able to get the spacecraft qualified and then actually launch it. So that experience really also shaped my interest in space exploration, and it also gave me a lot of confidence in pursuing this field, it sort of demystified what all goes into a space mission. Because apart from academic work, doing a practical project and looking at what are the practical challenges and actually executing a mission, and what work, as we are saying, goes before it launches. So yeah, that experience really shaped my interest, plus also gave me a lot of confidence.
That's amazing. So before we wrap up, I just want to ask you about if you have some message for the younger ones who are looking to pursue this field in future, how they should go ahead in their future, what particular stream they should choose for their studies, if you have any message for them.
Sure. So one thing is always be curious. From If you are coming from a place of curiosity and just pursue those questions, it will lead you to your goal. Other is I think one of the great things about aerospace or just space exploration is that it's very multidisciplinary. So even if you're not very sure of what particular stream you want to go into, whether it's science or engineering, or within engineering also, whether it's which particular engineering stream to take. So space is very multidisciplinary. So even if you choose some path for now, it doesn't mean that you cannot come back to space. So even if you don't do aerospace engineering or do like astronomy or astrophysics, you can still pursue and contribute to space exploration, because now even stuff like biology is becoming very common, when now we are also not just astrobiology, but also since we are sending humans, so even human biology is becoming very relevant to space exploration. So it's a very multidisciplinary field. So keep pursuing that, and you can always try to find applications for your particular field in space. So just keep pursuing that particular application, and I think you can contribute.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I guess space is such a field, like you can come into this particular field from many paths. So
Yeah.
you can be a electrical engineer, you can be a biology student, and like from different backgrounds, as you said.
Yeah.
So now you are back at IIT Kanpur. You have joined here as a faculty member. So what kind of projects you are taking for the future research, and if there are any Indian missions that you are also looking forward to, if you could explain this to our listeners.
Yeah, so this is a very exciting time in Indian space program, because we have so many missions planned. So we are going to send humans to space for the first time from India. We are going to send more landers and rovers to the moon, and we are to send orbiters to Venus, landers to Mars. So a lot of exciting stuff is happening. So currently, I have just started my lab at IIT Kanpur, and we are focusing on lunar missions and Venus missions. So my goal is to make these places more accessible. So apart from the big campaigns that we have, that ISRO is leading, we can also try to do more low cost missions, which can involve a lot of university students as well, and much more community involvement can be there. And we can do rapid missions, very focused, asking very focused science questions. So we can go just increase the frequency of going to these places.
Wow. Thank you so much, Rachna, for your time and being here. I guess our listeners would enjoy this conversation and they would have a lot to learn from today's episode. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. I had a really good time.
Thank you.